This Quoircast podcast is brought to you by Go Wide, Reimagining the Landscape of Theology by Martha Elias Downey. This book invites readers to expand their theological, spiritual, and relational horizons by sidestepping the notions of hierarchy and verticality. Go Wide employs the lens of spaciousness to explore biblical stories, theological concepts, and the nature of God, showing how biblical narratives often disrupt the status quo. Pick up Go Wide, Reimagining the Landscape of Theology, now available on Amazon.
Welcome to the Unbelief Podcast, your journey, actually our journey together beyond inherited beliefs to a spirituality that works for you. I'm your host, Jeremy. I'm a deep skeptic, also a pastor. We can fix that later, right? No? Damn. You've reached another book club episode of the Unbelief Podcast, and we are going through some different parables of Jesus, each one of these episodes. And today we have a parable that on the face of it just seems really simple because it's a parable that Jesus explains the meaning of. And I just want to let you know, if you grew up going to church, you've heard the parable of the four soils or the parable of the sower, however you want to characterize it. There is so much more here than you might think. And it's just fascinating. But before we launch in, just a little note. The Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, people often assume that there is some place, some magical place, either in the scripture itself, that it was, or outside the scripture, maybe in the margins or whatever, that shows that this was Matthew who wrote this, or Mark, or Luke, or John. That is not the case. And it's important to sort of keep that in mind, that the attribution of these authors was made later, significantly later. And so these were not necessarily eyewitness accounts, and especially in the form that we have received them. It's pretty clear that there's multiple things, multiple sources consulted or sort of gathered together in the writing of these. And today it's a perfect opportunity to think about that, because this parable, the parable of the four soils, and the explanation actually appears in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke, sometimes in the academic world and in other worlds, are referred to as the synoptic gospels. And they're referred to that way because they share so many passages. They share so many stories and parables that really what is clear is that there was another source that all of them drew from and then added to. That source, for a while back in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a lot of research done trying to really figure out exactly what that source was. The common term by the people who were doing that work was, they called it the Q source. That piece is not very interesting and important here, except to say that these draw from the same source, but they're not exactly the same. That is important because whoever it was that was writing these, whoever it was that was putting these stories in this particular order and telling them in this particular way, was doing so with their own purpose in mind. So we've talked before that ancient historians had different historical values. They were trying to tell you the truth of what happened by using the events that happened. And that was more important than getting things detail level accurate and it being confusing. So when we're looking at these, we need to keep that in mind. We're going to keep that in mind. We're going to notice how they are different and how they are shaped by the sort of overall message of that writer is trying to convey. Now, we don't know who were the actual writers or composers or collectors of these stories, but I'm just for ease of talking, I am going to use Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John as if they were the authors, but let's just agree right here that this is just a shorthand of saying the author of the book of Matthew. But it just gets tiring to me to say the author of the book of Matthew. So we're just going to say, we're just going to use Matthew. So this parable happens in Matthew chapter 13, verses 1 through 23, Mark chapter 4, verses 1 through 20, and Luke chapter 8, verses 4 through 15. Now, each week I have read the entirety of the parable to you. Since it's happening in 3 gospels, I am not going to read all 3, but I just gave you the references. If you want to go and read them in the New Revised Standard Updated Edition, that would be helpful, and you can do some comparison. And, just for giggles, I'll tell you a couple of the differences. So, we are going to see that there's small differences, like in Matthew, the seeds that fall on the path are eaten by birds, as well as Mark. In Luke, who is a little more artistic, they're trampled and eaten by birds. Right. You'll see things like, in Matthew, it says it yields 160 or 30, 60, 100 fold. Actually, it's 160 or 30 in Matthew. Mark is 30, 60, 100. And Luke doesn't even mention that. That's not part of the story he's trying to tell. So there are small differences, but some of those small differences, especially when you put in the context of the overall message or thrust of that telling of the story of Jesus, that book really brings some interesting things to light. So I'm going to read arbitrarily Luke. This is Luke chapter 8, verses 14 and 15, or 14 through 15. It says, "When a large crowd was gathering, as the people were coming to him from town after town, he said in a parable, a sower went out to sow his seed, and as he sowed, some fell on the path and was trampled on, and the birds of the air ate it up. Some fell on rock. As it grew up, it withered for lack of moisture. Some fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up with it and choked it. Some fell onto good soil, and when it grew, it produced 100-fold. As he said this, he called out, 'If you have ears to hear, then hear.' Then his disciples asked him what this parable meant, and he said, 'To you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of God, but to others I speak in parables, so that,' and this is a quote, 'looking they may not perceive, and hearing they may not understand.' Now, the parable is this. The seed is the word of God. The ones on the path are those who have heard. Then the devil comes and takes away the word from their hearts, so that they may not believe and be saved. The ones on the rock are those who, when they hear the word, receive it with joy. But these have no root. They believe only for a while, and in a time of testing fall away. As for what fell among the thorns, These are the ones who hear, but as they go on their way, they are choked by the cares and riches and pleasures of life, and their fruit does not matter. But as for that in the good soil, they are the ones who, when they hear the word, hold it fast in an honest and good heart and bear fruit with endurance. That was the version in the book of Luke. But we're actually just going to go in the order that they are in the Bible. Matthew chapter 13, verses 1 through 23. So we see the parable. It addresses the failure and success of the seed in its goal of bearing good fruit. Like it describes the environment in which the seed comes to have no effect, and in the places where the seed actually becomes productive. And in the book of Matthew, you see that it involves the grace of God and the responsiveness of human beings. And that's important in that there is an idea in the Bible of free will, right? That humans have the ability to choose to follow God, to choose to do the right thing or the wrong thing, to choose to do whatever, and that choice is theirs to make, right? And you see that from the very beginning, right? In the book of Genesis, humanity is given an actual choice, and they choose to do the wrong thing in that passage, but they have that choice. And this is interesting because really throughout the sacred text of the Bible, you see this not sort of passive God, but a God who is offering whatever it is. Maybe it's grace, maybe it's teaching, maybe it's forgiveness, whatever it is in that moment. But God is not compelling people, right? Though it appears in some places that God could have that power to force something to happen, God doesn't. And in general, there is this like giving of God, engaging of God in the world. But as one of multiple active agents. The other active agents, of course, are the humans. And so there's this interplay, right? It's God taking actions and humans responding to those actions. And each of those beings has agency. They can act or not act. They can respond in whatever way they want. They can change their mind, right? We see that in God multiple times over. In the same way that humanity can do the same. Humanity can do something bad and feel bad about it and try to change their mind and change their life. You actually see that even in the book of Genesis, right? They do something, they feel bad about it, and they say, oh man, I can't believe we did that. So we see that in the book of Mark, this sort of interaction between God and human beings and these like two active agents. Now, in Mark, you see that the parables that Jesus is teaching are they're meant to convey in the book of Matthew. They're meant to convey sort of further insight and knowledge, like different than when Jesus makes a legal ruling or has a sort of principle-based teaching. That these are like, we're going to go a little deeper. And it says like, basically it's saying like people who rejected Jesus and his message, right? the parable, and this I think is interesting in the book of Matthew. You see, this. I'm gonna read this to you. Basically, it's this darkening. Right. Each of them quotes from the book of Isaiah. This is Matthew gives a larger quote. Luke's is really kind of a summary, but in Isaiah it says, "You will indeed listen, but never understand." This is the Mark or the Matthew quote. "And you will indeed look, but never perceive. For the people's heart has grown dull, and their ears are hard of hearing," the dullness. And then they have shut their eyes so that they may not look with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their heart and turn, and I would heal them. So there's this in Matthew, he takes this broader quote from Isaiah. And one of the things that you understand that Matthew is trying to say is that, like, these people who are not hearing, who are not perceiving, these people who, have rejected Jesus' message, when they receive, hear, are given whatever the parables, they have this dark. The parables make it harder for them to understand because it feels like it is an outgrowth of their rejecting of Jesus's message. So there is the object then of the knowledge that Mark is saying Matthew is saying, is that there are these secrets. There is this deeper understanding, and they are the way that you get into the fullness of what Jesus is calling in Matthew the kingdom, and the way you begin in that understanding, in that depth, is the ministry of Jesus. And when you go deeper, it is in these parables. But at the end, in this explanation, and this happens in all of them, but since this is the first place we're looking, there's an interesting piece to this where there's definitely the people that are just not listening, right? But there are individuals who will listen, and it'll in some way take root. And so there's this like initial positive response, right? But it, for one reason or another, is not adequate long term. And Jesus talks about in those parts of the book of Matthew, when things are hard, people don't continue to follow the teachings of Jesus, and then one of the things that we have in all three parables, and first here in Matthew, is this thorns metaphor, where again there's this initial reaction, positive reaction, but one of the things that choke it is wealth. This is really interesting because wealth at that time was thought of as like an indication of blessing of God, of spiritual blessing. And some prosperity gospel preachers actually continue to say that wealth is an indication of the blessing of God. But Jesus says here that wealth basically is not, right? That wealth will deceive you. And And I would assert that one of the deceptions of wealth is that you believe that God has blessed you more because you have more money, right? That the money is a way of equating like my physical blessing to the blessing of God. But that is actually not accurate. That's a deceit. That is a lie that wealth tells you. And what it appears is Jesus is saying, I'm teaching something different here. I'm teaching this idea that like wealth is not it. In fact, I'm coming against wealth. I am going to do things like there's other places where wealthy people come to Jesus and he says, sell it all. In fact, in the early Christian church, they actually did that. In some of the communities, they would put all their resources together and sort of divide them equitably. Yeah. Wealth, man, wealth can deceive in such a huge. It can deceive in a way that, well, like the prosperity gospel, right? The idea that if you give money to the church, it'll come back to you tenfold. I've even heard people use this parable to say that's you sow into this ministry, you're going to get actual financial return. And especially for people who are struggling and really need some hope that they're going to be able to pay their bills. Man, that message is like a lottery message, right? It's why lotteries are really a tax on poor people. They're much more likely to try to win big by putting some money in a lottery than a wealthy person is. Jesus is saying like, oh man, don't go down that path. Right? Wealth isn't the thing. In fact, wealth can take you in the wrong place. Yeah. All right. So let's move on to Mark. So, each writer has their own understanding, right? We said that. They're trying to communicate something different. And Mark is doing this in spades. So in Mark, you see this throughout the book. Mark is really hammering home that there are these two groups of people. And Mark's idea of these two groups, I think, is bigger than in some of the other gospels, right? So Mark has, he situates Jesus and the crowd around Jesus as sort of the insiders, the ones who are getting it, the ones who are hearing and responding. And he situates them as sort of the in crowd, and the people who are on the outside are the scribes from Jerusalem, which in that world is the opposite. People assume the people who are on the inside are the scribes of Jerusalem. By on the inside, Mark will think about them as the people who have been given the mysteries of the kingdom, the secrets of the kingdom, the crowd and the people who are the disciples. But in that time, it was the scribes, the people from Jerusalem, the ones who knew the scriptures backwards and forwards and could interpret it in all these interesting ways. Those were the people that the vast majority would assume had the secrets, knew the most about God, about the kingdom of God. And Jesus is saying, no, they're on the outside. And not just them, Jesus' own family, right? Jesus' own family are also seen as on the outside. So you have these two groups that people would just assume those are insiders. They're not, right? And so this is not just here. It's throughout the book of Mark. And that's an important thing to keep in mind, because when you then read this parable in that overarching narrative, it takes some unique contours. It gives some interesting insights, right? And it's interesting because he leaves the scribes and Jesus' family open. Like, the question of their ultimate response is open. That's like in chapter 3. And so in this passage, when Mark quotes from the book of Isaiah, right? We've said that each one of these quotes from the book of Isaiah. Mark is using it in a different way than Matthew is. So when Mark quotes from the book of Isaiah, he has a shorter quote. He says, "They may indeed look but not perceive, and may indeed hear but not understand, so that they may not turn again and be forgiven." So what he's saying here is, or this bigger thrust that he's leaving it open, right? There are the people right then who are the disciples and the crowd, and those disciples and crowd are getting it. They're hearing and receiving the message. And I would say, like, maybe the disciples are the good soil, assumed. There are people probably in the crowd that are assumed good soil, but there are also probably people in the crowd that are hearing it. And, those other two options that we talked about, they're going to receive it positively, have a positive response, but not going to stick with it. Okay. But the outsiders, the scribes of Jerusalem, Jesus' own family, are assumed sort of in this parable, in the larger context of the book of Mark, to be most likely the rocky ground that's just closed off to it. But when you read the whole, this whole pericope, this whole section, you actually get an interesting note. So, like, again, in the context, in this broader context of the book of Mark, the insiders and the outsiders, right? When you then hear this story, you get this idea that he's left the ultimate response of scribes and his family open. But then you see here that the disciples don't quite get it, right? He said, it says the 12 asked him about the parables, and he says, "Do you not understand this parable? Then how will you understand all the parables?" Right? There's a sense that, like, maybe they aren't the good soil. And this openness to the fluidity between these different categories, right? There is the ability for the people that are the bad soil to become good soil, and the people who are good soil to become bad soil. And that is a beautiful thing, because if we aren't careful, we will do the same thing. Like, we will have this insider-outsider mentality, right? It's human to make these, like, either or pieces, either or ideas, and to immediately perceive somebody, put them in these categories, and imagine that the categories are static. But not for ourselves, right? When we look at our own life, we can see that we grow and we change, right? Like, for me, there are things that I used to believe that I am deeply ashamed of believing, and even more ashamed that I had acted on those beliefs. Yeah. Like, I honestly believed when my pastor said that queer people were going to hell and that having attraction to people of the same gender was a temptation. It was an acting on that was a sin. You know, like, I believe that. I lived according to that for a long time, to my own personal detriment, to my lack of my own psychological health, and the ultimate damaging of many of my relationships, because I wasn't being who I fully was. And I've grown. I've changed. I am not the person I once was. Which, in the way Mark is telling this, he's saying, yeah. The disciples didn't get it right there. Like, if they hadn't leaned in and said, Jesus, what does this mean? Like, they could have been just going down the path. And I think that's what I love about the book of Mark. It is this idea that part of being in the inn, right, the insider, part of these people who are understanding the mysteries is that people who are curious are asking the question and looking for answers. And obviously when they find them, they're trying to live according to them. But the key is that you've got to keep engaging, right? Yeah. And that's an interesting way. And Mark, as well as Matthew and Luke, I think there's another piece of this that, like, the seed's purpose is to germinate and grow and produce these positive fruits in people's lives. But in 3 instances of these soils, it's the seed itself that is the victim, right? The seed does not get to fulfill its purpose. The word, the teaching, the life of here, Jesus, is a victim of the soil. It's Mark. All right, let's look at Luke. Luke is interesting for his own reasons. Luke has shortened the Markan narrative and the Matthew. It's a shorter narrative. And I think it's fun because, and part of the reason I love Luke is Luke adds some details. Luke is often, I think, more artistic, even though he's concise. Like, for example, Luke talks about the rocky ground, right? Mark says rocky ground. Luke says on the bare rock, right? I love that. Or another one, Mark says to fall, which is fine. It's great. Luke says to fall down. And as a writer, right, I love it when people are able to write in a way that doesn't go on and on, but they're little additions. The way they phrase it helps me see something, right? To fall is one thing. To fall down is just a little better, right? The imagery is a little better. Another one, I'll stop here, but like, Mark is to come up, and Luke says to come up together, right? I love that. Just that one little bit together, right? There is this interweaving, like, anyway, we'll stop. I'll stop going on and on about why I love the book of Luke better than the other ones. Something we haven't talked about is the way the people who grew food back then grew food. And I don't want to belabor this point, because I think this is one of those things that if you go too far and you make the point of the parable how it's somehow different than the way they actually grew things at the time, you sort of miss the point, you know? So in what we see here, like, so these people, some people were subsistence farmers, like some people, like, they had to farm to live. Whether or not, so people who were farming, not everybody was farmers at this point, but everybody was familiar with it. And things were expensive and right. So what you see, so people would very intentionally plant the seeds. And because they needed each seed to grow. And so when you see this farmer here, you know, scattering the seeds, it is this sort of extravagance that seems in some ways just irresponsible, right? Like, why would you throw seeds on places that it is clear they won't grow? It is just a rock, like a bare rock. Like, why would you throw seeds there? And I think this story is helpful. This piece of it is helpful because you see a reality of what Jesus is doing here. And I think when he, you know, invites people to mimic the way he did things, there is a lack of judgment on the individual, right? I'm not going to look at you and decide whether or not you're going to respond to this piece of wisdom. I'm just going to give it. And that means I'm going to give wisdom. I'm going to give insight to people who are not going to hear it. Like, it's not going to be planted in their life, or people who like hear it and like, oh yeah. And then like it actually long-term doesn't matter to them. And then randomly you will also, some of what you are trying to do in the world will fall in the good places and it will grow up, you know? And so I think it's an important little piece, but it's a little piece. And then later you actually get this 30, 60, 100 fold, which in my research is like really over the top, like 7 to 10 fold is what was expected. And so in some ways, at the end of the parable, when you hear that, you're like, oh, the farmer was working with just magic seeds, right? So again, it's the disciples who ask questions here and try to get this deeper understanding. And actually, if you read this in context, which you should always do that, just a couple of verses later in verse 18, Jesus says this, he says that, I'm going to read it for you. So pay attention to how you listen. For those who have, more will be given. And from those who do not have, even what they seem to have will be taken away. So but that's in the context, that's not resources. Pay attention to how you listen, right? So if you put this in that broader context, what you see is this idea that leaning in, the more you learn, the more you listen to people explain stuff, the deeper you go. There was actually at that time, there was a sense of a Jewish privilege of being given the law, right? The first 5 books of the Bible. That's in the Bible itself. But later, during this time, there was a tradition that the possession of something called the Mishnah That was the real gift. So the Mishnah is the Oral Torah. It's a collection of teachings about the Torah, about the law, by rabbis to people. It's a collection of rabbinical teachings, and it is a ton. It fills up a bookshelf, whereas, the first 5 books of the Bible doesn't even come close. But it's this echoing of that idea where the gift, yes, there is a gift to hearing the thing, but the real gift is when you lean in and you hear people explain the thing, right? The parable is nice. The parable is wisdom, but when you lean in, when you ask more, yeah, that's where it is. Another really interesting thing about the book of Luke is how he talks about the good soil, right? This is the one that verse 15, but as for that in the good soil, these are the ones who, when they heard the word, hold it fast in, and this is the phrase I want to point out, an honest and good heart. The word heart, it's the right word, translation wise, obviously, New Revised Standard Updated Edition. However, like is often the case with languages, some words are bigger in another language than they are in your own. And so while the translation can be accurate, it doesn't express the fullness of that word. And heart is one of those. So we situate in modern English, modern American culture for sure, we situate the will, actions, decision makings in the mind, right? He set his mind to it. We'll say things like that. That means that he's gonna follow through. He's gonna do the thing. But in the ancient Near Eastern culture, the center of the will was in the heart. Yes, emotions, but also the will. That's important here because when Jesus says that the good soil has to do with the heart, it's not just the emotions. It's not just that these people received it in this like warm emotional place. It's that they received it in a place and in a way that they were going to act on it. They were going to try to live that out, that their experience and their action in the world was part of the whole thing and how they received it. Yeah. And oh, wow. Right. That's a thing. Like hearing something and being like, oh yeah, then being curious and learning more about it. That's awesome. Right. That's the mind, the curiosity. But with this understanding of the heart, it's about hearing it, leaning in, being curious about it, but also curious, not just in the data way, but curious in the like, oh wait, how do I do this? Like, how does this shape who I am, the way that I live, the way that I act in the world, right? And man, that really does change things. And I guess what I want to say when I read these parables, like, I think one of the things that they're saying is like everybody cannot understand things. They can be confused, not listen, not lean in, not try to understand things, but also everybody can understand things. Even if you start out not caring a bit or not putting it in your heart, not living the thing out. You can start there, but you are not doomed to that. But at the same time, just because you're in a good place right now, it doesn't mean you're there forever either. You can go back and forth. You can be good soil and then be not good soil and then be good soil again. There's this openness and expansiveness to this that I think when we overcategorize it, we get it a little off. In this, I think it, as we've talked, it challenges arbitrary divisions. And then these these teachings, they are unimpressed with power, right? It's not that the powerful person is the good soil. The wealthy person is the good soil. If anything, the wealthy person is the bad soil, right? The power that comes with wealth is the bad soil. It may even be the precondition for bad soil, right? That it is definitely not the precondition for the good soil. And this idea of being unimpressed with the markers of success and power in this life, and that's a huge thing. That we've got to find ways to let go of the way that we perceive our world that underscores the importance of power, underscores the importance of wealth. But then, the other thing, and I love this so much, it is the looking for mystery, the curiosity. And sometimes, right, if we're not careful in our life and in spirituality, like when we are forming beliefs, mystery can feel like a problem. Like, I don't know what this means. I don't understand this. And it's one of the reasons I don't like a lot of times how people talk about or perceive this thing that people commonly call deconstruction. Because they often put it in a negative light that they don't know. They thought they knew and they don't know anymore. And that is inherently negative. But we see in each one of these, the disciples not knowing, not understanding. And the problem exists when we experience the not knowing, when we experience the mystery and we ignore it. We say, I don't know. Or we read something that doesn't make sense and we say, oh, no, I don't know. Or we just read it, it doesn't make sense, and we skip it. We move on, trying to find a thing that does make sense. But one of the things that is being taught here is that the mystery is the place you need to lean into. Like, in a way, it's like the writers of this story, or maybe you might want to say Jesus, that Jesus is saying, as this wisdom sage, he's saying, follow the mystery. Like, the mystery is where it's at. Lean into the mystery. Ask the question. Be curious, because if you want to know the kingdom, if you want to find the secrets, the hidden knowledge, the stuff that will change everything for you and for your world, you're going to find it in the mystery. You're going to find it when you lean in, when you follow the mystery. It'll lead you to God. And I think it's not just the Bible. When you follow the mystery in your life, when you follow the mystery in your own personality, right? When you say something or do something that seems weird, like, why did I say that? Why did I think that? Why did I do that? Don't just be like, that's weird. No. Lean in. Lean into the mystery. When you're walking down the street and you see somebody out of the corner of your eye, sometimes there's this mystery out of the corner of your eye. Like, sometimes it's a person needing money. Sometimes it's a person like turning, walking into that mystery with an open heart, being curious. I found so many times that when I don't do what I normally do, when I see the mystery, I'm walking, I'm on a mission, I just let it go. When I don't, I have an experience. I'll do something irresponsible sometimes. A couple of days ago, I was walking with a friend. And I'm not saying this to make me the hero of the story. I'm saying this to show you, like, this is not the norm. Walking down the street, just bought Starbucks, and there was a guy out of the corner of my eye talking to somebody else. But his demeanor, his mannerisms, something about him. Normally, I would face forward, not make eye contact, because I know making eye contact with somebody who has that demeanor means they're going to come over and likely ask me for something. For whatever reason, the mystery caught my attention and I went into it. The guy came up to me and he says, I'm a vet. I have a place to stay tonight, but it's over here. And I had this social worker who gave me the directions how to get there. And he shows me these directions that he's written up on the back of some fragment of paper of, like, you go to this metro stop, you transfer to this, then you get off and you transfer to this bus. And he said, I just need money to get there. And I just said, I don't know how much money I have. I took out my wallet. I gave him what was in it. Maybe went to buy alcohol or whatever. I was walking back down the street and we were talking and I had all of this realization hit me. One is that my country does a disservice to its vets. If this guy was being honest, we know that there's a mental health sort of epidemic amongst veterans. But also, I was somebody's dad. Somebody's dad was homeless and just needed a little bit of money. And my guess is that most of the people were like I normally am. Ignoring him, walking away. When he talked, acting like he wasn't talking, right? That's what I normally do. But he was somebody's dad. I just needed some money. And then I got to this place where it's like, but even if he's not, even if he's going to use that money to go and buy alcohol and get drunk, when I think about it, if I was in that space, you know what I would do to alleviate the horror of being homeless every night? I'd probably want to drink. I'd probably want to numb my suffering. And as maybe unhealthy as that is, if that's all it was, and he used that money to numb his suffering for one night, man, I don't know. There's mystery. And mystery, when it is spiritual, leads you to do things, understand things, act in a way that may go against cultural norms, right? May ignore power, may ignore wealth, may ignore the advice that everybody has given me. Don't give money to those people because they're going to use it for drugs. Sometimes the mystery pulls you into a place where you just push back. Say, I don't care. I don't care. Today I don't care. This mystery has me. So I guess this week, look for the mystery. Follow the mystery. And follow it together with other people. Like, we have this group that does this kind of stuff together. Find mystery, we follow it, we talk. It's called Not Church. It's like church in that, like, it's a religious community. We talk about religious things. We also talk about politics and memes and all of that stuff. And we're there for each other in really hard times, right? We call it not church, though, because it's like that, except a lot of us have been hurt by church because people were judging us for what we believe, told us we shouldn't doubt, told us whatever. We don't do that. And we also, a lot of us have some trauma around people asking us to give 10% of our income to the church. So we don't do that, but it's not free to do this kind of stuff. And so it's $3 a month. And basically it's pay for what you get. Don't give us an arbitrary donation. Pay for what you get. If it doesn't work, just stop paying. If you're interested in that, I would love to see you there. You can go to patreon.com/skepticpastor. It's patreon.com/skepticpastor. And wherever you're listening to this, give us a positive review. Give us the stars. All of them. It really does help. That's it. That's the podcast. Shout out to the Choir Network, to Patheos, to Matthew and Keith, who make everything happen. Now, get out of here. Go do something to make the world a better place. Okay? We'll see you next time.